I call Julianne Genter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I take a slightly different perspective on the situation than the previous speaker, Phil Twyford. The Green Party will be supporting this amendment on the condition that there are several amendments to it. And my slightly different perspective is that there's a story around development in New Zealand, which says, and particularly in Auckland, which says that people all want to live on a quarter-acre section. They want to be able to drive everywhere. We need to build motorways to assist that. But the reality is that there's no point building a whole lot of cheaper houses and places for people to live unless people have affordable access to jobs, schools, shops, green spaces, amenities. People don't just need houses, and that's been the whole failure of this special housing area approach, is it's entirely focused on houses, not neighborhoods, which is what people need to live good lives. And we will completely undermine the objective of making housing affordable if we do so in a way that makes transport far more expensive. And so we can support this amendment on the basis that it is not going to result in urban sprawl because of the many subsections that don't just stop urban growth boundaries, but actually require local authorities to take a much more proactive, detailed spatial planning process, which sets aside land that is of special value. And it might be of value for a community to have land that is used for agricultural purposes close to the city, to have land that's preserved for biodiversity purposes, and to ensure that all of the new development is around infrastructure corridors which provide good transport linkages to other parts of the community. And it's not just any transport corridors, because the other thing that's missing, I think, from this amendment is the recognition that climate change is an urgent challenge for everyone on this planet. And we have to be thinking and creating communities where people can get around without increasing dangerous climate pollution. It's not affordable. It's also not wise to be planning for car-dependent, sprawling neighborhoods that cost people a fortune, segregate communities, mean it's harder for them to access jobs. And on top of it all, we've got this warming climate. We've got a pressing need and opportunity to create vibrant, livable communities that are linked up by smart, clean public transport, which means people can socialize, work, relax while getting around the city. They don't have to spend hours stuck in traffic. They don't have to spend a whole heap of their income on ever more cars just to be able to, so their kids can access schools and jobs. So this is the Green Party can support a smarter approach to planning, which is going to achieve not only affordable housing, but affordable transport and access to the things that people need to live a good life. And that takes a proactive local government approach. That is what has been lacking under this national government because they're so ideological. They're so, as Manama Davidson, my colleague, says, disconnected. They're thinking about things in a very siloed way. So we've got this focus supposedly on affordable housing. Well, one, we're not even going to achieve that with special housing areas. But two, what good is cheap housing if you have expensive transport? And what good is cheap housing if you can't access jobs? It is not going to solve the problem. So the amendments I plan to table will not only will amend it so that it's prohibiting the use of planning rules which are currently used, like minimum parking requirements, which are actually pushing development out from the center. Where people actually want to live is the existing urban area, because that's where one has access to jobs, access to communities, access to schools, hospitals, everything that they need. And that hasn't happened because planning rules actually make it more difficult and expensive to provide homes in the existing urban area. Now, if we didn't have all those rules, we wouldn't need urban growth boundaries. But the reality is we have all those rules, and so we also have urban growth boundaries, and so there's pressure from both sides. I would prefer to leave the urban growth boundaries in place until we have sufficient development within the existing area. But I can see that if every part of this proposal in Part 6 was included, including the detailed spatial planning, setting aside areas of special value, ensuring that future infrastructure corridors and networks, Mr. Chair, ensuring that if we have new communities sprouting up in places like Warkworth or down around in between Pukekohe and Auckland, it has to be around the rail network, and there has to be electrified passenger transport services. Those communities in greenfields could be within walking distance of electrified rail networks. And that makes it, and they could have, schools and parks and amenities, everything that people need. But if we're going to go down the route of a paddock subdivided into a bunch of McMansions with no schools, no amenities or shops, and everybody has to get on the motorway and get into a queue of cars to get anywhere, well, that's not going to be the solution that New Zealanders want, is it? New Zealanders want to live, they want affordable housing, they want affordable transport, they want to do their bit, they don't want to be adding pollution, climate pollution to the atmosphere, and they need government to be proactively investing in the infrastructure. That's the transport, the water management, that is the housing itself. They need government to be leading on that infrastructure investment in a way that enables them to live good lives, to reduce our energy use and our pollution use, and to create happier, healthier communities, because that's the opportunity we have. We've done things pretty poorly the last 50 years, but we can see in communities overseas that have a much more integrated approach to planning, have a much more proactive investment strategy around public transport. It works well, and people love it. They love living in those places. And you can have affordable housing, affordable transport, respond to climate change, and have vibrant, thriving, green communities. It's fantastic. It's just sad that the current government doesn't seize this opportunity to create far more livable neighborhoods for New Zealanders. So on the amendment that I want to propose, one is that we get rid of these, that we prohibit the planning rules that are preventing more homes and neighborhoods from being built in the existing urban area, as well as prohibiting urban growth boundaries. And we need to have a requirement as well in the new clause 46C, subclause B. We've got this requirement for local authorities to undertake detailed spatial planning. And in that requirement, they need to take into account climate change. There's no point doing this planning around long-term projects like affordable housing and affordable communities if we're not taking into account the urgent need to respond to the long-term challenge of climate change. And that needs to be at the forefront of our thinking of the way our cities and towns develop in the future. It has to be. So I will table an amendment shortly, Mr. Chair, a proposed amendment, which will mean that local authorities, in undertaking their detailed spatial planning, they will take into account the need to mitigate and adapt to climate change, which I think is fair enough, and I'm sure the Labour Party will be supportive of that. So thank you very much.
The Honourable David Parker.